Welcome, flip clock fans. You're looking at a Howard Miller flip clock that I had done a restoration on. But if you look a little more closely, you're going to see an indentation at the top there over the minutes. This thing has been affected adversely by heat. So I went on the lookout for a proper tube for this, and we need this size. A 3 1/4 inch outer diameter and 3 inch inner diameter. It has to be that specifically. Now you see this Amazon tube here, which is fairly cheap, is not high enough quality. It's got striations in there. But I bought it anyway so I could just double check to make sure that's exactly the size I needed. I looked everywhere, and the only place I could find it was at this company. And evidently I bought their last piece because it went on out of stock after I bought the piece. It's high optical clarity, lightweight, UV stabilized. It's exactly what I needed for this, but we have a lot of work to do before we can get something that's going to work. The first thing you got to do is you got to get this thing cut square. Now, I don't know anybody who can cut something that straight with a handsaw, so you're going to need something like this miter saw. And I have a DeWalt 12-inch miter saw. I just had it before. Wife got it for me, and I had to get this special blade. It's expensive, but it has to have a high number of teeth. This one is carbide tipped, and it's made for cutting plastic. It's important to have the right tools for this. Now, when I'm cutting, you've got to draw down nice and steady, but not fast. When you're cutting this kind of stuff, it's going to generate heat, and it's going to melt your plastic and throw it up onto your cylinder if you're not careful. It's just going to mess up the process. A lot of what you're seeing is me having done practice to get to this point, to where I act like I know what I'm talking about. Now, what I had done later is I wrapped it in tape before I cut it, just for more safety. I peeled off the edge here so I can work on it. And if you're going to use tape, you have to use tape that has a animal's name in it. That's all we use around here. So I've peeled away the tape so that I can do some sanding. I'm using 180 grit to start, because it's fairly smooth. So I'm going to start up at 180, and I'm going to take my time. Now I'm going to do this by hand. I could try to use an orbital sander or some other kind of sander. But again, if you're not using that correctly, you're going to cut into the plastic. You're going to cause melting and warpage. So I decided, hey, this is just going to be a handcrafted project. Now with this sandpaper and the way I'm doing it, I can feel that I'm perpendicular to the surface. I'm trusting myself to get this done, and I'm continuously moving it. So I'm taking off material equally as I go. Very conscientious about that. And I just take my time. And this does take a lot more time than what I'm going to show. So you can see I've got it down with the 180 grit. Got most of the blade marks out of it. Then we're going to go to 220. I fold it over like this instead of using a block. Again, I feel like I have more control, and I'm sanding lightly. I can feel that I'm exactly perpendicular the way I'm doing this. So it takes quite a while to get this down to this point. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and do a test fit to make sure I'm not going the wrong direction. I don't want to keep wasting time. So my first test fit shows that I'm on track. So we'll press on here and get the other side done as well. Now, we've been high-tech, so now we're going to go hillbilly tech, because I don't have something that's going to work. Well, I have something that's going to work, but maybe it's not going to be very pretty. Now, at Harbor Freight, they have these buffing wheels, and they're made from 100% cotton, and they're really good. I've used these on the faces of flip clocks for years. So I've got one of those in there. I'm going to tape this on. This drill is just a skill saw. It's not a high-end drill. But I'm going to tell you, this thing is a workhorse. It's been working for me for years. I haven't had any problem with it. The RPMs are not so super high that I worry about burning up my plastic. And I use this all the time. Now, we're going to use an Old Faithful here. We're going to use Meguiar's plastic polish. I tell you, when I get onto something and then it works for me, I stick with it. It's just something that I have always had good luck with, and I'm going to stick with it. Now, you could go with something more abrasive to start and then work your way down. But again, I've got a wheel that's flying through there and it could hit the inside of the cylinder, so I'm going to play it safe and just take extra time to get this where I want it to be. I want it to look like glass by the time I'm done with it. And after a while, you can see it starting to work. I cut out a lot of this, though. You're not seeing everything. You can see the difference there. That's the unfinished side there, just sanded. And I spent a lot of time on it. After a while, I get kind of a system to where I have the tube up against my body, up against my hip, and then I can get a little more smooth and consistent And that's going to be the trick here to keep things consistent so you get a nice snug fit. Now I'll just use my portable polishing cloth, also known as my shirt, to check, and I am definitely well on the way here. You can see that. So we'll finish this up a little more and then do the other side. You see the before and after there, or the after and before. So here we are. We've got both sides done. Now the tape's a good idea whenever you're working on this because it just wants to get scratched. Now here we are, and you're seeing it's pretty clear. Now, why do I have to do that? You don't have to, but it's going to improve the light flow through the tube. You're going to be able to see the wood better, and it's just going to make it look better. The original was polished, so I want the replacement to be polished. And now, I started out at 5 1/8 inch, because I think it's about 5 inch it's supposed to be, and it's worked down to 5 1/16. So here we are with the Meguiar's again, of course. I'm not getting paid for this, I just really like their stuff. Now I'll show you part of this. I have done this several times, multiple times. I'm just showing you how I do it. And you want to get nice small circles as you're going around, and you just work it. You just work it. And this is time consuming. That's all there is to it. And then I'm just going to buff off the polish here. So again, yes, I could use a buffing wheel, but it can get out of hand. And anyone who's done stuff on flip clocks knows that you can cause optical aberrations pretty quickly, and I want this to look as good as possible. I've put a lot of hours into this already, just this one piece. Now this is me doing the inside of it, of course, and thankfully it's wide enough to where I can reach in there and get something done. This isn't exactly how I do it. I'm just showing you the concept because I spend a lot of time on it to try to get all the areas. And again, I'll buff it out just like I did the outside. Now what we need to do is make a template for the holes, because there's holes that drill through that cylinder. Now this is crucial. If you see there, this right here, it tumps on that side. That's where most of the warpage was, and I can't start the template on this side because it's uneven. So I'm going to use this side here that is squared, pretty much, as the side I'm going to set the card to here. Now I'm setting it right there on the edge, as tight as I can get it, because that's going to transfer over to my good tube. So once I got it in place, I could tape it down, but I'm going to trust myself to hold it tight. And I find the holes, and I'm just going to rub them in until I get an indentation. I tried different methods to make a template, but the index card seems to be the right consistency, and it's working. So there you can see the indentions. I've got it on the new tube there. I'm going to go ahead and draw it out with a pencil. Now you may ask, why didn't you just stick a pencil down in the holes on the base? And well, I actually tried that, and I'm getting a better result this way, because I have done a practice tube. So I'm drawing them out so I can see them better for this next step, where I'm going to double check the alignment. So I'm checking with the base, and this is what's got me thinking, you know, I couldn't really make one of these for someone else. Who knows if all the bases are exactly the same? There's a good chance they're not. I could make a cylinder for someone, but drilling the holes would probably be a mistake. Now I'm starting with a pilot hole. I don't know if that's exactly necessary, but I really don't want to have any problems. Now you may not notice, you may not be able to see this, but I am going at a relatively slow rate here. I don't want that plastic to melt. That causes issues. Now if you go too slow and it catches on the edges, it's going to grab that plastic and it's going to chip. It's not necessarily going to crack, but it's going to look unsightly, and even though no one will see that, I'll see that every time I take it apart. And so again, a pilot hole probably isn't necessary, but it's going to help me guide the final drill bit, and in this case I'm going to use a 3/16 inch drill bit to get those holes drilled out. So on this one you'll see my hand pretty close, but I'm actually feeling the temperature of that plastic. I know that sounds corny and maybe it's dangerous, but I know I'm not melting that plastic. I don't want to have any issues. There we go. We've got the 3 holes drilled. Now this is the mechanism that I'm going to put in. I've repainted the rotor. I've got it looking really nice, I think. Before I had talked about using a different mechanism. Now this is probably the best Copal 101 mechanism I have in the whole studio. And it's from a beautiful clock. And I looked at that, There's two issues. Number one, the screw is different size. So on the Howard Miller here, it's larger. Of course, the smaller one I could drill and tap. But then I started thinking, wait, now this is a beauty here. This is the best example I have. It's got the varnish impregnated fiberglass tubing intact. The original bulb still works. There's no point in destroying a real good 101 just for the Howard Miller. So I'm not going to do it. We're going to stick with the original. Not as shiny, but it doesn't look bad at all. So here's our tube. Pretty much finished. We've got the holes drilled. Now we're going to get ready and double check, and then we're going to do assembly. So here's our base. The big hole in the back, that's where the electronics go down through. The two other ones that are in line are the screws. And from where I'm sitting, it's perfect. Now putting this slat in here, this piece of wood here helps the clock rest flat. And it lines up good with the holes. Now what I'm finding is this is a trick, and I can imagine that assembly was pretty difficult. It would be time consuming. Now I'm going slow because after all that work, if I rake that metal across the inside of that tube, it's going to just cause a major scratch. So even though this is good stuff, it will scratch. Anything acrylic like that will scratch, as we all know from our flip clock faces. So again, taking my time, working it in. Now, what I don't show you is I struggled for a while getting the screws up in here and getting everything aligned up. See, I'm trying to align at the same time as I'm trying not to let that mechanism scratch the top. And then I have to get a screwdriver up underneath there to get that screwed in. So here we've got the clock, and it's all together. You can see the difference with the cylinders. You can see the warpage there and the color difference. Now one thing I didn't show you in the previous video was that I could never get this to seat properly on the right side. But I was able to set it so that you really couldn't tell, but I knew it was there. So we're going to go ahead and take a look here and see how things turned out. Now I think the rotor looks pretty good, that color. It looks clean, the edges are smooth, and we're going to check our fit. So this is what it all comes down to. How does it fit and how does it look? So after pressing in equally all the way around, we see that we've got pretty tight tolerances here for something that was essentially handcrafted. Now one thing I didn't do is I didn't put holes right there on the edges. Those holes were for wooden screws to go up inside the end pieces. They would have had to do that for the consumer. And I also didn't put the felts on there because I may look into it a little more. I may glue that on there eventually. But I don't have to do it the way they did for the consumer because I'm going to have this on display. I think it looks better without those holes. So there it is. After hours of work, it took me several days. We've got an upgraded Howard Miller flip clock in the studio now. I think it looks beautiful. I really think it's made a big difference. And was it worth all that work? Well, I actually think it was. I had a good time trying to do it. It was a little bit nerve-wracking, but there it is. Well, thanks for taking the time.